Daniel Cross was having what future historians would probably call a significant diplomatic moment, but what he was currently experiencing as "please let me wake up from this nightmare." He stood in the royal palace of Thessara Prime, surrounded by alien nobility who all seemed to know exactly what they were doing, while he, mid-level attaché thrust into representing humanity because of a flu outbreak and a gravity accident, was desperately trying to remember if the formal bow was supposed to be 15 degrees or 20. The reception hall was beautiful in ways that made Earth's finest architecture look like enthusiastic finger painting. The walls shifted through colors that responded to the room's collective emotional state, currently displaying what Daniel hoped was curious interest, rather than amused contempt. Floating platforms drifted overhead carrying refreshments that Daniel wasn't entirely sure were safe for human consumption. And the whole space was designed with the kind of aesthetic sophistication that suggested the Thessarans had spent several extra millennia perfecting the concept of impressive. Daniel wore his best diplomatic formal wear, a suit that had cost him a month's salary, and still looked aggressively plain next to the Thessaran nobles in their flowing garments that seemed to defy gravity and good sense simultaneously. His translation device sat uncomfortably in his ear, occasionally offering helpful commentary like "cultural significance high" and "proper response uncertain," which was really just the AI's way of saying, "You're on your own, buddy." The Thessarans themselves were elegant in ways that made Daniel feel like evolution had been particularly unkind to human proportions. Tall, graceful, with long ears that swept back from their heads and could apparently rotate independently to track sounds. Their faces were angular, their movements fluid, and every single one of them looked like they'd been born knowing how to navigate social situations without sweating through their formal wear. Grand Vizier Kasvara approached him with the measured steps of someone important enough to make time move slower through sheer authority. She was impressive even by Thessaran standards, taller than most, her ears adorned with jewelry that probably indicated rank Daniel should recognize, her clothing clearly ceremonial and definitely expensive. "Envoy Cross," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that the translator struggled to convey properly. "The sovereignty is honored by humanity's presence at this formal reception. We hope the accommodations have been satisfactory." "Very satisfactory," Daniel replied, mentally running through his crisis-downloaded diplomatic protocol training. "The Thessaran people's hospitality has exceeded all expectations. On behalf of humanity, I express gratitude for the warmth of our welcome." He'd practiced that phrase 17 times in his quarters. It still came out sounding slightly robotic, but Kasvara's expression suggested approval or possibly just polite tolerance of his linguistic inadequacies. "We have prepared a ceremonial participation opportunity," Kasvara continued, and Daniel's stomach dropped because ceremonial participation in diplomatic contexts usually meant thing you can't refuse without causing offense. It is traditional to invite honored guests to engage in selection ceremony, a gesture of cultural trust and mutual respect. "I would be honored to participate," Daniel said, because what else could he say? "Though I should note that my understanding of Thessaran customs is still developing." "Your willingness to engage despite uncertainty demonstrates admirable character," Kasvara replied, which Daniel chose to interpret positively despite the nagging feeling that he was agreeing to something he'd regret. She guided him through the palace corridors, past observing nobles who watched with the interest of people anticipating either entertainment or disaster. They entered a grand ceremonial hall where approximately 20 Thessaran women stood in formal arrangement. All of them were elegant, all wore elaborate clothing, and all were looking at Daniel with expressions ranging from curiosity to what might have been amusement at his obvious discomfort. Kasvara's voice took on formal quality. "The selection ceremony is ancient tradition. The honored guest chooses a companion for evening festivities, demonstrating cultural engagement and trust. The chosen companion will guide you through the celebration, introduce you to court society, and represent the bridge between our peoples. Daniel's translator helpfully added, refusing participation would constitute significant diplomatic insult, cultural importance, maximum. So basically, Daniel was expected to select a stranger from a lineup of elegant alien women, any of whom could be anyone from minor nobility to someone politically significant, with zero cultural context, and the full knowledge that whatever choice he made could have diplomatic implications he couldn't possibly predict. He looked at the assembled women, trying to identify some marker, any marker, that might indicate appropriate selection. They all looked equally elegant and equally terrifying. Some made eye contact, others looked away demurely, and Daniel had absolutely no idea if either behavior indicated interest or if he was supposed to interpret them through completely different cultural frameworks. His diplomatic training, such as it was, had covered many scenarios. Random selection from alien lineup while representing entire species was not among them. The hall was silent except for the quiet harmonics of Thessaran whispered conversations. Every eye was on Daniel, waiting for his choice. He could feel sweat building under his formal collar, could hear his own heartbeat over the translator's occasional bursts of cultural commentary that amounted to "this is important," without offering any useful guidance. Daniel made a decision that future diplomatic instructors would probably use as example of either brilliant instinct or catastrophic judgment. He couldn't predict which. He closed his eyes, turned slightly to randomize his position, and pointed. The silence that followed his selection was profound and slightly terrifying. Daniel opened his eyes slowly, afraid of what he'd see. The assembled Thessaran nobility had dropped into formal bows so deep they were practically touching the floor. Grand Vizier Kasvara's expression cycled through surprise, something that might have been respect or horror, an eventual resignation to whatever chaos was about to unfold. The woman he'd pointed to stood perfectly still at the center of the arrangement, her expression mixing surprise with what might have been amusement. She was tall even by Thessaran standards, her long ears adorned with intricate jewelry that looked ceremonial and definitely expensive. Her clothing was elaborate, layered silk in colors that shifted like aurora, with patterns that Daniel's translator helpfully identified as royal significance. Maximum. The honored guest, Kasvara's voice carried weight that made Daniel's stomach drop further, has selected Princess Lyrazha, heir to the Thessaran throne and first daughter of the sovereignty. This is unprecedented. Daniel's brain offered several responses. I'd like to change my answer. I didn't know. Can we pretend this didn't happen? But his mouth, operating on autopilot diplomatic training, managed. I am honored by Princess Lyrazha's gracious acceptance. Princess Lyrazha. Because of course Daniel had accidentally selected alien royalty, stepped forward with poise that suggested handling unexpected situations was part of her job description. Up close, she was even more impressive. Her features sharp and elegant, her eyes carrying intelligence and something that might have been curiosity, her presence commanding in ways that made Daniel very aware he was just a mid-level attaché pretending to be a proper diplomat. She extended her hand in what the translator identified as formal gesture of acknowledgement. Daniel took it, noting that her skin was warmer than expected and her grip firm without being aggressive. You have interesting selection methods, Envoy Cross, she said, her voice carrying those same harmonics but with an undercurrent that might have been humor. Shall we discover if your instincts are as reliable as they appear bold? Daniel managed a smile that probably looked more panicked than confident. I look forward to learning from your guidance, Your Highness. Please call me Lyrazha. If we're to be evening companions, excessive formality would be exhausting. She turned to address the room, her voice carrying authority. The envoy has shown remarkable courage in his selection. let us proceed with the celebration." The court rose from their bows, and the hall erupted in activity. Conversations, movement toward banquet areas, musicians beginning performances that sounded like wind through crystals. Daniel was guided to a position of honor at the high table, seated next to Lyrazha, while the entire Thessaran court watched with varying degrees of fascination. "You didn't know who I was, did you?" Lyrazha asked quietly, her tone suggesting the answer was already clear. "I had no idea," Daniel admitted. "I apologize if—" "Don't apologize, it's refreshing." She accepted a drink from a server, some kind of sparkling liquid that changed colors, and gestured for Daniel to do the same. "Do you know how many people have approached me in the last 5 years without extensive planning and political calculation? None. You pointed at random and selected the one person in that hall who should have been untouchable. It's either catastrophically poor instinct or remarkably bold." "Probably both," Daniel said, taking a cautious sip of his drink that tasted like starlight and flowers and possibly mild intoxication. "I'm not actually a proper diplomat. I'm support staff thrust into this role because of medical emergencies and accidents. I have no idea what I'm doing." Lyrazha's laugh was genuine, musical in ways the translator couldn't quite capture. "That might be the most honest thing anyone said to me in years." She raised her drink slightly. "To catastrophically poor instinct and remarkable boldness. Let's see which one you actually possess." Daniel raised his own drink, meeting her eyes that were the color of Thessaran sunset, and had the distinct feeling his random selection was going to complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Around them, the celebration continued, but Daniel was acutely aware that every conversation, every glance, every moment was being observed and analyzed by a court trying to understand how a human attaché had accidentally selected their princess, and what it might mean for the delicate diplomatic dance between their species. The banquet proceeded with the efficiency of events planned by people who'd spent centuries perfecting formal celebrations. Daniel tried to follow proper etiquette, while also trying not to accidentally insult anyone through improper cutlery usage or inappropriate eating sounds. The food was spectacular and slightly terrifying. Dishes that moved on the plate, flavors that changed halfway through each bite, and at least one course that the translator identified as ceremonial significance unclear. Consumption optional. Princess Lyrazha guided him through each course with patient amusement, occasionally leaning close to whisper explanations that the translator couldn't provide. "That dish indicates respect for tradition. You should take at least one bite even if it tastes like mineral deposits. The green one is safe for human biology. We checked before the banquet, and the floating spheres are decorative. Eating them would be like consuming the centerpiece." "Noted," Daniel said, carefully avoiding the floating spheres while navigating the dish that indeed tasted like mineral deposits mixed with regret. "Is all Thessaran formal dining this complicated? This is simplified for human digestion. Traditional court banquets have 17 courses and last 6 hours. Her ears rotated slightly. A gesture Daniel was learning indicated humor. "Your selection of me saved you from at least 10 additional courses. The princess's presence allows abbreviated ceremony. Then my random selection was accidentally brilliant. Let's call it fortuitously catastrophic." Between courses, Thessaran nobles approached to offer formal greetings and thinly veiled curiosity about the human who'd selected their princess. Daniel handled each interaction with diplomatic platitudes he'd memorized, while internally panicking about whether he was using the correct level of formality or accidentally proposing trade agreements through improper hand gestures. Grand Vizier Kasvara appeared during a lull, her expression suggesting she had concerns with a capital C envoy cross. Princess Lyrazha, the court is intrigued by this development. The selection ceremony traditionally involves choosing from eligible court members. The princess's participation was ceremonial. She stands with the selection group as honor to guests, but is not typically considered available for selection. I apologize for any protocol breach, Daniel started, but Lyra's Ha interrupted smoothly. The envoy demonstrated remarkable cultural sensitivity by selecting the most honored position available. His choice shows he values quality over easy selection. Her tone was pleasant and absolutely brooked no argument. Surely the court appreciates such discernment. Kasvara's expression suggested she appreciated many things, but Daniel's random selection wasn't high on the list. Of course, Your Highness, the court simply wishes to understand the envoy's selection criteria. Daniel, realizing that honesty had worked once, decided to try it again. I had no selection criteria. I was nervous, unfamiliar with customs, and made a random choice hoping to avoid offense. That I selected Princess Lyra's Ha was complete accident, though I'm honored by her gracious acceptance. The silence that followed this admission was broken by Lyra's Ha's laugh, genuine and musical, and apparently inappropriate given the scandalized expressions from nearby nobles. He's honest, Kasvara, refreshingly, catastrophically honest. The envoy admits complete ignorance rather than pretending cultural knowledge. That's either foolish or brave. Both, Daniel offered, definitely both. Kasvara retreated with the dignity of someone who'd been handling diplomatic chaos for decades and wasn't about to start showing visible concern now. The banquet continued, conversations flowing around Daniel in languages the translator struggled to follow, creating a wash of harmonics that was beautiful and overwhelming. As the formal portions concluded, Lyra's Ha suggested a walk through the palace gardens, framed as allowing the envoy to experience Thessaran horticultural achievements, but really an escape from constant court observation. Daniel followed gratefully, relief at leaving the banquet hall mixing with nervousness about being alone with alien royalty he'd accidentally selected from a lineup. The gardens were spectacular in ways that made Earth's finest botanical displays look like enthusiastic weeding. Plants shifted colors in response to their approach, water features flowed upward through anti-gravity technology, and the paths were lit by bioluminescent organisms that created patterns like constellations. The whole space felt alive in ways that transcended simple plant life. "You really didn't know who I was," Lyra's Ha said once they were away from immediate observers. Not a question, a statement that carried something like relief. "I had no idea. The Grand Vizier said it was a selection ceremony for evening companion. I panicked, pointed randomly, and apparently selected the one person I shouldn't have been able to." Daniel paused by a fountain that sparkled with colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum. "I apologize if I've created diplomatic complications." "You created something, certainly." Lyra's Ha sat on the fountain's edge, gesturing for Daniel to join her. The selection ceremony was partly a test. The court wanted to see how humans handle unexpected cultural challenges. Whether you'd panic, try to refuse, or adapt, most predictions involved you selecting based on positioning or apparent accessibility. No one predicted random selection of the princess. Because it was stupid. Because it was unpredictable. The court prizes calculated decisions, careful political maneuvering. Your random selection bypassed all their predictions. She looked at him directly, her eyes catching the garden's bioluminescence. "Do you know why I participated in the selection lineup? I wasn't required to. I could have watched from the high table. To honor the human delegation. Partially. Also because I'm tired of calculated approaches, of every interaction being political theater. I stood in that lineup thinking no proper diplomat would dare select me, that I'd participate in the ceremony while remaining safely unselected." Her ears rotated in that humor-indicating gesture. "Then you pointed at me with your eyes closed and turned my expectations into chaos." Daniel processed this. The admission that his random selection had disrupted carefully laid plans, that his ignorance had created genuine surprise in a court that apparently didn't experience surprise often. I still don't know if I should apologize or celebrate that I accidentally caused chaos. Neither, just continue being honest. Lyrazha stood, moving deeper into the garden where the paths became less formal and the lighting more intimate. Tell me about Earth. Not diplomatic summaries, real experiences. What's it like being human in a universe full of species that seem more advanced? Daniel followed, surprised by the personal question. Intimidating, exciting. Lonely sometimes, being the new species, knowing that everyone else has been navigating interstellar relations for millennia, while we're just figuring out which fork to use at formal banquets. We had the same fears once. Thessaran records show our first contacts with elder species involved similar anxiety, worried we'd appear primitive, desperate to prove ourselves worthy. She stopped near a grove where the plants created harmonic sounds in the breeze. The fear doesn't entirely disappear. I still wonder if I'm adequate for my position, if I'll lead my people well when the time comes. You seem pretty adequate, Daniel said, then realized how that sounded. I mean, you're clearly competent. Intimidatingly so. I'm the one fumbling through diplomatic protocols like I learned them from children's picture books. Lyrazha's laugh echoed through the garden. And yet you were honest about that fumbling. Do you know how rare honesty is in court? Every conversation is calculated, every admission measured for political impact. You freely admit uncertainty, ask questions without pretending knowledge, and somehow that makes you more trustworthy than diplomats with decades of experience. They talked for hours, conversation flowing more easily as translation software adapted to their speech patterns. And as they both relaxed into the realization that they were just two people trying to navigate absurd situations thrust upon them. Daniel learned about Thessaran court life. The pressure of being heir to a civilization spanning multiple worlds, the isolation of position despite constant company, the exhausting performance of always being princess rather than person. Lyrazha learned about human diplomatic service. Daniel's accidental career path from academic anthropology to mid-level attaché. His panic at being thrust into situations beyond his training. His genuine fascination with alien cultures mixed with terror of committing irreversible faux pas. Why did you agree to continue this conversation? Daniel asked eventually. You could have returned to the banquet, let some advisor handle the awkward human who accidentally selected you. Because your selection was the first genuine surprise I've experienced in years. Every interaction in court is predicted, every approach calculated. You pointed randomly and selected me without political motive, without careful planning, without any agenda beyond avoiding offense. She met his eyes. That's either refreshing or terrifying, and I'm curious which one it actually is. Probably both, Daniel said, his standard response becoming a theme. Most things involving me are both. The garden's bioluminescence shifted to colors indicating late evening, and Lyrazha reluctantly suggested they should return before the court sent search parties. As they walked back through paths that now felt familiar rather than alien, Daniel realized he genuinely enjoyed the conversation. Not as diplomatic obligation, but as connection with someone interesting who happened to be alien royalty he'd accidentally selected from a lineup. At the garden's entrance, Lyrazha paused. I would like to continue our acquaintance, Envoy Cross, not as ceremonial obligation but as genuine cultural exchange. You're fascinating in your honest uncertainty, and I'm curious if what we've shared tonight is real or simply novelty of unpredicted interaction. I'd like that too, Daniel replied, meaning it. Though I should warn you that spending time with me involves significant risk of embarrassing diplomatic incidents and questionable decision-making. I'll consider that advance notice rather than deterrent. She extended her hand in that formal gesture, but this time it felt personal rather than ceremonial. Until tomorrow, Daniel Cross, try not to accidentally select any other royalty before we meet again. I'll do my best, though I make no promises given my track record. Daniel returned to his quarters feeling like he'd survived something significant and potentially created something unexpected. His random selection had been accident, panic, and complete ignorance of proper protocol. But the conversation that followed, that had been genuine, surprising, and possibly the beginning of understanding that transcended formal diplomatic protocols. He filed his daily report with Earth Diplomatic Command, carefully omitting the part where he'd randomly selected alien royalty and spent hours in garden conversation. Some things were too complicated to explain through official channels, especially when he wasn't entirely sure what they meant himself. The following morning, Daniel woke to 17 messages from Earth Diplomatic Command, 12 from Forward Station administrators, and one from Ambassador Rivera that simply said, "What did you do?" Apparently, news of his selection traveled fast through official channels, and everyone wanted detailed explanations of how a mid-level attaché had ended up spending an evening with the Thessaran princess. Daniel composed careful responses that emphasized cultural exchange and diplomatic opportunity, while strategically omitting the part about closing his eyes and pointing randomly. Some truths were too honest for official reports. His schedule, previously focused on supporting senior diplomats and avoiding mistakes, now included direct engagement with Thessaran court. Apparently selecting the princess upgraded his diplomatic importance, whether he wanted it or not. Today's agenda: cultural briefing session with Princess Lyrazha on Thessaran governmental structures. Tomorrow, joint appearance at trade negotiation preliminaries. Next week, participation in festival celebration that sounded fun, until Daniel read the part about ceremonial performances expected from honored guests. He met Lyrazha in what the Thessarans called the consultation chamber, a room designed for private meetings, with walls that shifted colors to indicate emotional resonance and seating that adjusted to accommodate different species' physiology. She wore less formal attire than yesterday, though less formal for Thessaran royalty still involved elaborate clothing that looked expensive and probably required servants to put on correctly. "Envoy Cross," she greeted him with a smile that suggested their garden conversation had shifted their dynamic from purely formal to something more personal. "Or should I call you Daniel, given that excessive formality would be exhausting?" "Daniel works perfectly," he replied, settling into a seat that adjusted itself with slightly disturbing precision. "And I should probably stop calling you Your Highness every other sentence." "Please do. Lyrazha is perfectly adequate." She pulled up holographic displays showing Thessaran governmental structures, complex hierarchies that made human bureaucracy look streamlined by comparison. "I'm supposed to brief you on our political systems, but I suspect you're more interested in understanding why everyone keeps staring at us." "That's definitely on my list of questions, yes." The selection ceremony traditionally involves choosing from eligible courtiers, people of status, but not primary royalty. I participate as ceremonial honor to guests, but am not considered available for actual selection. She manipulated the hologram, highlighting something that looked like a flowchart designed by someone who really enjoyed complexity. "Selecting me requires either extensive political calculation or complete ignorance of protocol. The court is divided on which category you represent." "Complete ignorance," Daniel confirmed. "Definitely the ignorance category, which makes you either refreshingly honest or a brilliant strategist pretending ignorance." Her ears rotated in that humor gesture. "The court hasn't decided which, and it's driving my advisors to distraction." They worked through the governmental briefing, Daniel asking questions that revealed his genuine interest in Thessaran culture, mixed with complete confusion about bureaucratic hierarchies that made Earth systems look simple. Lyrazha explained with patience and occasional amusement at human perspectives that found Thessaran logic confusing. "Your species makes decisions through debate and voting," Lyrazha asked at one point, her tone suggesting this was a fascinating anthropological curiosity. not through harmonic consensus and resonance reading. We tried resonance reading once, but it turned out humans aren't naturally bioluminescent, and the best we can manage is sweating nervously, which doesn't make for effective communication. Her laugh echoed through the consultation chamber, and the walls shifted to colors that Daniel's translator helpfully identified as joy with undertones of surprise. I like your perspective, Daniel. You make our customs seem strained, rather than assuming human approaches are inferior. Everything seems strange when you're new to interstellar society. I'm just honest about the confusion. Over the following days, Daniel and Lyrazha's scheduled interactions increased, partly because diplomatic protocol required it after his selection, partly because both of them found the interactions valuable beyond mere obligation. They appeared together at trade negotiations, where Daniel's honest admission of limited expertise paradoxically made human positions seem more trustworthy. They attended cultural demonstrations, where Lyrazha explained significance, while Daniel asked questions that revealed genuine interest rather than performative engagement. The Thesarin court watched these interactions with interest ranging from approval to concern. Some saw the developing connection as positive, evidence that humans valued Thesarin culture and built genuine relationships. Others worried about inappropriate influence, about the princess being swayed by alien perspectives, about the political implications of royal interest in a species so recently contacted. Daniel faced similar scrutiny from human diplomatic channels. Ambassador Rivera, recovered from Centauri flu and returned to active duty, called him in for what the schedule labeled performance review, but what Daniel recognized as explain yourself immediately. You selected the Thesarin princess from a lineup, Rivera said without preamble, then spent evening in private conversation. Now you're appearing together at official functions, and the Thesarin court is treating you as significant diplomatic presence. Explain. Daniel explained. The panic, the random selection, the honest conversation that followed. Rivera listened with the expression of someone deciding whether to be impressed or horrified by subordinates' actions. So you accidentally created a diplomatic opportunity through complete ignorance of protocol, then leveraged personal connection into enhanced negotiation position. Rivera's tone was carefully neutral. I wouldn't say leveraged. I would. And technically I should reprimand you for exceeding authority and creating unpredictable diplomatic variables. Rivera paused. However, trade negotiations are progressing better than projected. Thesarin leadership is responding more positively to human delegation, and Princess Lyrazha has explicitly requested your continued participation in cultural exchange programs. So instead of reprimand, I'm officially expanding your role to include direct diplomatic engagement. Sir, I'm not qualified. You're qualified enough that alien royalty requested you specifically. Sometimes diplomatic success comes from unexpected places. Rivera's expression softened slightly. Just try not to accidentally select any more royalty without checking with me first. Daniel returned to his quarters feeling promoted and overwhelmed simultaneously, a state he was becoming familiar with. His communicator chimed with a message from Lyrazha. Tomorrow's festival celebration requires ceremonial participation. Meet me in the garden this evening so I can explain what you've accidentally agreed to. Bring tolerance for potentially embarrassing cultural requirements. He found her in the same garden where they'd first really talked, sitting by the fountain that sparkled with impossible colors. She looked less formal than usual, her elaborate jewelry reduced to simple pieces, her clothing practical rather than ceremonial. Bad news first, she said as he approached. Tomorrow's festival involves traditional blessing ceremony where participants exchange symbolic gifts representing desired qualities in partnerships. As my selected companion, you're expected to participate. Define partnership in this context. Anywhere from evening companionship to formal courtship. depending on interpretation and gift symbolism. The court will be watching to determine which category we represent. Daniel sat heavily on the fountain's edge. So I accidentally participated in a ceremony that could be interpreted as courtship initiation. And tomorrow I'm going to participate in another ceremony that will either confirm or deny that interpretation. And my choice of symbolic gift will communicate intentions I don't fully understand. Essentially, yes. Her ears rotated apologetically. I should have explained more clearly before confirming your participation. I can arrange for diplomatic exemption if you're uncomfortable. No, Daniel interrupted. I mean, yes, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm uncomfortable with most diplomatic situations. That's basically my default state. He paused, choosing words carefully. What I'm not uncomfortable with is spending time with you. The festival participation, the potential partnership implications, those are complicated. But the actual time we spend together, that part isn't complicated. That part I genuinely enjoy. Lyra's expression cycled through surprise, pleasure, and something more vulnerable than Daniel had seen from her. I enjoy it too. More than I should, probably, given the diplomatic complexities and the fact that we've known each other less than a week. Is there a proper timeline for enjoying someone's company? Because I don't think I've followed proper protocol for anything since arriving on Thessara Prime. Protocol, Lyra's said slowly, suggests maintaining appropriate distance, avoiding personal attachment, ensuring all interactions serve clear diplomatic purpose. She met his eyes directly. What does your instinct suggest? Daniel thought about his random selection, about garden conversations, about the way Lyra's laughed at his self-deprecating humor and shared her own uncertainties despite her royal position. My instinct suggests that genuine connection is rare, that finding someone whose company you enjoy shouldn't be overthought, and that maybe the best diplomatic outcomes come from actual understanding between individuals rather than calculated political maneuvering. Your instinct, Lyra's said with a smile that made Daniel's chest feel tight, is either remarkably wise or catastrophically optimistic. Probably both. Most things involving me are both. They spent the evening discussing festival preparations, with Lyra's explaining symbolic gift traditions, and Daniel trying to identify something that would communicate, I value our connection, but am not accidentally proposing marriage through cultural misunderstanding. They settled on a gift that Lyra's assured him indicated respect, interest, and openness to continued acquaintance without implying commitment beyond what they'd already developed. As Daniel prepared to leave, Lyra's caught his hand. Whatever happens at the festival, whatever the court interprets from our participation, I want you to know that your random selection was the best accident that's happened to me in years. You see me as person rather than position, ask genuine questions rather than performing calculated interest. That's rare and valuable. Same, Daniel replied, meaning it. You don't make me feel like a diplomatic imposter pretending competence. You seem genuinely interested in human perspective rather than just tolerating cultural exchange obligation. That's also rare and valuable. They stood in the garden with its bioluminescent lighting and harmonic plants. Two people from different worlds who'd found unexpected connection through random selection and honest conversation. Tomorrow would bring festival participation and court scrutiny and potential complications. But tonight was just them, choosing to value what they'd found despite, or maybe because of, how unpredictably it had started. The festival celebration exceeded Daniel's already high expectations for Thessaran cultural events. The palace grounds transformed into something between art installation and living ecosystem, structures that grew from the ground in real-time musical performances that involved harmonic resonance that made the air vibrate, and food that Daniel was pretty sure violated several laws of physics along with possibly some laws of good taste. He wore formal attire that Thessaran tailors had modified for human physiology, still nowhere near as impressive as Thessaran Festival ware, but at least not obviously foreign. The gift he'd selected, a crystalline formation representing shared journey, according to Lyra's Ha's cultural translation, sat in a ceremonial container that kept it at the proper temperature and luminescence level. Lyra's Ha found him near the blessing ceremony staging area, wearing festival attire that made her previous formal wear look casual. Her clothing incorporated living light, bioluminescent patterns that shifted with her movement, creating effects like watching Aurora made wearable. Her ears were adorned with jewelry that sang in harmonics with the festival music, and she radiated the kind of presence that made Daniel very aware he was just a human attaché, pretending to belong in royal company. "You look terrified," she observed with amusement. "That's actually appropriate for blessing ceremony, showing awareness of cultural significance. I'm terrified of accidentally proposing marriage through improper gift-giving technique. Is that the right kind of cultural awareness?" "Perfect amount." She took his hand, a gesture that drew immediate attention from observing courtiers. "The ceremony involves exchange before assembled court. I'll present my gift first, establishing intended interpretation. Your response gift and words will either confirm or modify that interpretation. Try not to panic. No promises on the panic front." The blessing ceremony was held in a circular platform that floated above the festival grounds, because apparently regular ground-level ceremonies weren't dramatic enough for Thessaran culture. Daniel and Lyra's Ha stood at the center while court members and human diplomatic delegation watched from surrounding areas. Grand Vizier Kasvara conducted the ceremony with formal precision, explaining in both Thessaran and human standard language the cultural significance of symbolic gift exchange. "Princess Lyra's Ha," Kasvara intoned, "heir to the Thessaran throne, presents her gift to Daniel Cross, honored representative of humanity." Lyra's Ha stepped forward, holding a gift that glowed with internal light, something organic and crystalline simultaneously, pulsing with colors that Daniel's translator struggled to describe. "I offer this living crystal, representing growth through understanding, connection across difference, and the choice to build bridges where tradition suggests maintaining walls. May our continued acquaintance strengthen both our peoples and our personal understanding." The court reacted with murmurs that the translator identified as significant approval with undertones of surprise. Apparently Lyra's Ha's gift and words communicated something important that Daniel hoped he wouldn't accidentally contradict. "Daniel Cross," Kasvara continued, "honored representative of humanity, now presents his response." Daniel stepped forward with his crystalline formation, very aware that every eye was on him, and that his next words would be analyzed extensively by both Thessaran court and human diplomatic leadership. "I offer this shared journey crystal, representing the path we've begun through accident but continue through choice. May our differences become strengths rather than obstacles, and may honest connection guide our peoples toward mutual understanding and respect." He'd practiced those words 17 times that morning. They still came out slightly nervous, but Lyra's Ha's expression suggested approval, her ears rotating in the humor gesture that indicated pleased surprise. The court's reaction was more complex, conversations erupting in harmonics that the translator rendered as overlapping commentary about diplomatic implications, cultural precedent, and apparently substantial speculation about the princess's judgment and the human's worthiness. Kasvara called for formal recognition, and the court offered the traditional response that indicated acceptance of the gift exchange, if not complete approval of its implications. The ceremony concluded with Kasvara declaring the gifts properly exchanged, and the participants honored in their cultural engagement. Daniel and Lyra's Ha descended from the floating platform, to immediate attention from courtiers and diplomats wanting to discuss, analyze, and generally make Daniel regret every life choice that led to this moment. Ambassador Rivera extracted him from particularly intense conversation with Thessaran trade negotiator, who wanted to discuss how personal relationships might influence commercial agreements. You just participated in ceremony that the Thessaran court interprets as formal declaration of courtship interest, Rivera said without preamble. Please tell me this was intentional diplomatic strategy rather than more random selection. It was semi-intentional, Daniel offered. I knew the ceremony had implications. I didn't realize the implications were quite so formal. Semi-intentional courtship interest in alien royalty. That's a new one for diplomatic incident reports. Rivera sighed with the patience of someone managing subordinates who kept creating unprecedented situations. For the record, is this genuine personal interest or diplomatic performance? Daniel looked across the festival grounds where Lyrazha was handling her own interrogations from court advisors. Genuine, complicated and unpredictable and probably inadvisable given the diplomatic complexities, but genuine. At least you're honest about it. Rivera's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, the trade negotiations are going well partly because Thessaran leadership sees genuine human interest in cultural engagement rather than purely commercial motivation. Your accidental courtship is accidentally advancing diplomatic objectives. So I should continue accidentally advancing objectives through honest personal interest. Yes, but try to make the accidents slightly more predictable if possible. The festival continued with performances, demonstrations, and cultural exchanges that Daniel navigated with Lyrazha as guide. They participated in traditional dances that Daniel fumbled through with endearing incompetence, shared festival foods that ranged from delicious to technically edible for human biology, and generally demonstrated that cross-species cultural engagement could work when approached with genuine interest rather than performative obligation. As evening settled and the festival lighting shifted to softer colors, Lyrazha guided Daniel to quieter area away from central celebrations. They stood overlooking the palace grounds, watching festival-goers continue celebrations below, and both felt the weight of what they'd acknowledged through ceremonial gift exchange. You realize the court will expect continued courtship participation now, Lyrazha said quietly. There are traditional steps, cultural expectations, timelines for progression or dissolution of interest. It's very structured and somewhat exhausting. Sounds romantic, Daniel replied with sarcasm that transcended translation. It's not really. It's political theater with personal implications. She turned to face him. But underneath the theater, underneath the cultural expectations and diplomatic complications, I genuinely value what we've developed. Your random selection brought someone into my life who sees me as person rather than political asset, who asks questions rather than making assumptions, who admits uncertainty rather than performing false confidence. I value it too, Daniel said. You make interstellar diplomacy feel less like constant performance and more like actual connection. You share your own doubts and pressures rather than maintaining perfect royal facade. You laugh at my bad jokes and explain your culture with patience rather than treating my ignorance as offense. So underneath the ceremonial complications and court scrutiny and diplomatic implications, we both want to continue this. Lyrazha's expression was vulnerable in ways that didn't match her royal bearing. Yes, Daniel confirmed. Though I should warn you that continuing relationship with me involves significant risk of embarrassing incidents, questionable decisions, and probable violations of protocols I don't know exist yet. But I'll consider that part of your charm rather than deterrent. She took his hand, the gesture feeling more natural than their first formal touch. Fair warning, relationship with me involves intense court scrutiny, political pressure to end association with recently contacted species, and extensive cultural requirements that will probably drive you to distraction. But I'll consider that adventure rather than obstacle. They stood together overlooking the festival, two people from different worlds who'd found unexpected connection through random selection and chosen to build on it deliberately. The path forward would involve complications, cultural differences to navigate, political pressure to resist, bureaucratic expectations to manage. But they'd weathered the blessing ceremony, survived court scrutiny, and found that underneath all the diplomatic complexity was genuine connection worth protecting. Over the following months, Daniel and Lyra's relationship developed through both formal courtship requirements and stolen private moments. They attended state functions where their partnership advanced human-Thessaran relations, participated in cultural exchanges that built genuine understanding between their peoples, and occasionally escaped to palace gardens where they could just be two people rather than diplomatic representatives. The Thessaran court eventually accepted that their princess had chosen interest in a human attaché who'd selected her through random chance, accepting if not entirely approving. Human diplomatic leadership acknowledged that Daniel's unorthodox approach had created opportunities traditional diplomacy hadn't achieved, supporting even while requiring extensive documentation of his unpredictable decisions. The Human-Thessaran Trade Agreement was signed amid celebration that acknowledged the personal connections that had influenced political outcomes. Daniel's random selection, that moment of panic-driven pointing that should have been catastrophic diplomatic error, became recognized as the accidental beginning of understanding between species who'd maintained careful distance until one confused human randomly selected someone who happened to be princess and happened to value honest uncertainty over calculated approach. Daniel Cross, mid-level attaché who'd become diplomat through medical emergencies and random selection, stood in the palace gardens where he'd first really talked with Lyra's and considered the